Welcome to today's episode of Vestibular Talks. We have been honored to have Brian in the show. Brian is the author of this book, The Body Politic. Really excited to read it. It should be pretty fun and interesting. The main character in the book also is suffering from vestibular disorder or some sort of disorder that resembles the symptoms of vestibular disorders. So I highly recommend it. It's on sale now. I got it on Amazon. You guys can get it there too. Brian is a writer, an author, a teacher, and he's also a father and a husband. And he's going to share with us his experience about living with a vestibular condition. And also, he's a great advocate for vestibular conditions as he's been published in the New York Times. And he wrote articles about what the condition feels like. So he's creating a lot of awareness out there in the world. So enjoy the episode. Welcome, Brian. And remember to like, share, and subscribe. All right, guys, find your happiness. Episode of Vestibular Talks. I really appreciate you being here today.
I've been really looking forward to it. Finally, we're getting to do this together.
Yes. All right. So do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, your story, what's going on?
Not at all. So about a decade ago or so, I was dizzy for a few days. It was unclear why, and it went away. But then it came back a year or so later, and I saw my primary care doctor who told me it would go away, as primary care doctors tend to do. And then I went to see an ENT and a neurologist, and both said they weren't really sure what was going on or what the problem was. And I was still, from the time I woke up to the time I went to sleep, I was dizzy all day, every day. And that lasted until I saw an additional neurologist who put me on a combination of antidepressants and called it vestibular migraine. So that was 7 years or so ago, and I was doing much better for a couple of years, but then I started having nightmares every night, and it was because of the antidepressants, and I went off the antidepressants onto topiramate or Topamax, which was a little bit better, but I was less dizzy, but every night was really terrible because I would wake up multiple times per night. So we tapered down on the Topamax from, whatever it was, 150 milligrams to 100 to 75 to 50. And then when I went to zero, it came back brutally and worse than it ever had been before. So I tried going back on the drugs that had helped in the past, and nothing worked. And then I went for the next 4 or 5 years, all day, every day, being incapacitatedly dizzy, where I would wake up and it felt like I had, just drank 30 glasses of wine or whatever it is. And then it would get increasingly worse as the day went on. I had blurriness in my left eye. I had 2 young sons at the time, and I couldn't really be around my family. I had to stop teaching. I had to stop writing. It was really terrible. And in the middle of this time, I wrote an article for the New York Times about my experience. And from that article, I received thousands and thousands of responses, half of whom were from people suffering like I was, who had never seen it in print before and were just excited to have somebody to share their story with. And the other half gave me a lot of suggestions on how to mitigate the symptoms. So from there, I tried everything. I tried herbalists and chiropractors and acupuncturists and exercises and breathing techniques and meditation and a variety of different medications, injections of Botox and antipsychotics, antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, blood pressure medication, everything I could find, until I found a otoneurologist in Pittsburgh named Dr. Furman, who said maybe I had something called PPPD, sent me to the Mayo Clinic to see Dr. Staub there, who diagnosed me with it, put me on a series of medications, and now I am on a lot of Xanax, Zoloft, and, for reasons that the doctors don't really understand, Verapamil. But when I try to decrease the amount of Verapamil, I get blurry vision again, and nobody really knows why. So I'm to the point where I am able to teach again and live again. I have, a few hours every day of clarity. I've never been as sort of grateful for the life I have as I do, but I still have nightmares every night. Waking up is very early, very difficult. And the last few hours of every day, I'm back to this mental discombobulation and brain fog and discomfort.
All right. Thank you for sharing all of that. It's extremely interesting because everything that you describe is what I experience and what many other people experience. And many doctors say the same. First of all, they said, oh, it's anxiety. Go home, it'll go away.
Right.
Other doctors just, the more that you go and see a specialist and you go to like neurologists or ENTs, otoneurologists as well, they start to get a little bit more specific with it. And eventually they say, yeah, it's either vestibular migraines or PPPD. They send you home with a cocktail of medications, hoping that will kind of like keep the symptoms at bay. So they don't give you a cure. They don't give you a treatment plan for a cure. They just give you a treatment plan to keep the symptoms at bay.
That's right.
What I don't like about this type of approach is that the medicines that they give you, number one, are very ototoxic, meaning that they affect your vestibular system, making you more dizzy, making you hear tinnitus or tinnitus, the ringing beep noise. They also cause hearing loss. And in many cases, they cause depression and nightmares, like you're describing yourself. So it's very frustrating.
Speaking about side effects that are, a percentage of the people who take these medications experience those side effects. The drugs, as suppress the vestibular system.
Yes.
And in some cases lead to side effects such as tinnitus and nightmares, etc. In my case, the side effects are so much less horrible than living with the disorder that I've decided that the medication cocktail is worth it. But it's a very difficult situation, especially as people haven't been able to find solutions to the root causes of these systemic problems.
Yeah, but my point being about the medication. Yes, I'm not opposed to medications; they do help. But my point is, for how long do you have to become dependent to them in order to have a decent quality of life, right? Like, do you have to be on them for the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? Meanwhile, they are causing more and more damage to your vestibular system, to giving you nightmares, giving you more potential depression. So that's my point. Like, why don't these specialists and doctors kind of give you a little bit of hope and say, hey, maybe it's a 5-year term. Great, I'll take it for 5 years.
Oh, the answer is because the studies haven't been done. So I've done a follow-up research for an article that is going to come out in the New York Times in February or March, I'm not sure. And I've spoken to the heads of the vestibular clinics and societies at Hopkins and in Florida, at NYU, at Stanford, and at the Mayo Clinic. And there haven't been studies that have gone out beyond 10 years on these vestibular disorders. So doctors aren't able to say how long it will last or whether these medicines will cause damage in the long run or whether they won't. And there's a lot of disagreement among the experts in the field. So as much as the neurologists who don't specialize in these issues don't know and don't have experience and aren't able to even tell you, most neurologists haven't heard of PPPD and don't know what it means. And the ones who have dedicated their lives to this, they don't have studies that have gone out long enough to be able to guarantee the answers to patients such as ourselves.
Fair enough. Brian, let's rewind a little bit back. When you were talking about your dizziness, how will you describe it? Is it the actual spinning vertigo, or is it more of a swaying back side to side?
So for me, it was not vertigo at all. It was a combination of physical imbalance where I felt like I might fall or that the room was a little bit tilted at all times. And what was worse than that was the discombobulation and brain fog and just lack of ability to focus and to have the full extent of, neurological capability that I'd been accustomed to. So it was, I think that, and then on top of that was the depression that was a product of not knowing sort of every day being so difficult, so profoundly painful and hard, and not knowing if it was going to last the rest of my life or not. And I think that that combination is a unique struggle with chronic pain in general and dizziness specifically, because yeah, it was the imbalance that was aggravating, but it was the lack of access to my own brain which really made me despondent.
Yeah. Now, the other alternative approaches that you mentioned, like the chiropractor, yoga, meditation, breathing, do you find some relief with any of those, or just the medication was the only thing that gave you relief?
I was very hopeful to find relief with other things, especially after I wrote the article. So many people said, yeah, I was dizzy and I saw a particular practitioner and that person helped me. And I am a big believer in the potential of alternative medicine, both with, you know, non-Western medication-based medicine for other issues and for these also. And I went in hoping it would work, and I found no benefit from any of it. I kept on going through, yeah, I kept on going through cycles of pretty profound disappointment where I would meet somebody new and he would just say, or she would say, oh, you know, I know what the problem is. Your spinal cord is misaligned and it's, you know, preventing flow of blood. Or an acupuncturist would say, oh, I can feel that your chi is off and let me just do this. And other people said, oh, you know, you just need to go on a diet. For a year, I was off alcohol and caffeine and dairy and wheat and gluten and soy and vinegar and chocolate, and it didn't help at all. Just none of these things had any benefit at all, which is, I think, part of the other reason why I'm willing to take the risks on the medication now, because I tried everything, you know, in all the books that everybody suggested other than the medication. And, you know, maybe there was a 5 or 10% help when it came to vestibular rehabilitation, some of the exercises that worked a little bit. But the only thing that really let me feel like I could comfortably exist in the world again were these medications. And I agree with you. The studies haven't been done, and I'm not comfortable with the fact that it might be the rest of my life on these medications. But compared to anything else, it was obvious to me that I had to, you know, make that decision.
Yeah. And I agree, because obviously I read your article. That's how I found you and how we got connected. Very, very, very interesting and complete article as well. So congratulations on that. And thank you for writing it. The one thing though, Brian, is that when this happens, because yours happened similar to what happened to me and to many other people, that it just comes kind of like out of nowhere. Like you're living a normal, regular life, successful career, having a family, and then from one day to the next, it's like boom, like
Yes.
a wall of bricks hit you in the face, and your life changed 360 degrees.
That's right.
So I agree with you that we become so vulnerable that it's easy for other people to influence us in ways that we're looking for hope that might not be the best ways. Like, you're right. I've spent so far $13,000 of money, like,
yes,
trying to find any relief.
No, because we're so desperate, and I don't want to call the practitioners charlatans necessarily, but I think that there is a spectrum of people who know they can't actually help and say they can for financial reasons, and people who believe that they can help sincerely. And I think many of them fall on a sort of optimistic middle ground where they want to be able to help, but there's a false certainty, and not only with alternative medicine practitioners, but of Western, MDs as well, who say, oh, I know the problem, this is the problem, this is how we're going to solve it. And I must have seen, I just like you, spent tens of thousands of dollars and seen dozens of these people across the country who have said, with a degree of certainty, yes, I'll be able to help. And zero of them could. So you get, at least I became cynical about it over the course of however many years of suffering that I've experienced.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but I think you're 100% correct. Many of them might do it for financial gain, and many just simply, they do believe that their expertise can help, but this is not the area where their techniques can work. Yeah. So Brian, now the medication is helping you. Your children are a little bit older now. They're still young, but not, they are no babies.
Right.
are you able to basically somewhat have a normal regular life with work, with family, with
Yes,
activities?
it's a great question. I am able to have a normal life as long as I'm very careful. Where
Okay.
the instead of teaching 5 days a week, I now teach 2 days a week. Instead of being able to go out to dinner, I know that I need to be in bed by 9 or 9:30 every
Mhm.
night, else the next day will be very difficult. I know that I can't have more than one drink of alcohol in a couple day period of time, or I can never drink caffeine. I know that if I am with people all day, by the end of the day, I'll really be struggling. So I have to build pockets of time into every day to be just by myself to try to decompress a little bit. So I'm able to experience a rich life where I'm with my family and I'm writing and I'm able to have so much that I didn't have when I was at my worst. But I understand that there are many just activities or routines in my life that ideally I would like to have that I don't even try anymore.
Yeah, yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's true. Have you tried flying? Have been on an airplane since you got this or no?
Yes, so airplanes are difficult for a lot of reasons for me. The being in a tight space with a lot of different moving parts makes it difficult for me. The fluorescent lights are difficult. Flying with the children, where I have to try to control them and keep them calm, is very difficult for me. And then anytime there's a time change, it affects me pretty drastically. Where it's not just that I'm tired, but that kind of if I go forward 6 hours to Europe or back, 3 hours to California, it takes me days to recover from that, what would ordinarily be jet lag. So I can do it if I need to, but it's not great.
Not ideal. Yeah. Something that you mentioned that it's very interesting is that you said that your left side uh, felt like it was kind of like off, and and
Yes.
and, and I that's how I describe it when I first started experiencing this. I said to people, I feel like my left side of my body, especially my brain and my eye, is not working in unison with the right one. When you explain this to doctors, did they say any reason like why that might
Well,
be, or
yes, and part of the problem is that if you tell that to an ophthalmologist, then the answer will be because let me look and study and your eyes are the problem. And if you tell that to a neurologist, they
yeah,
say, oh, let's do the CT scan and the MRI because your brain is the problem. And if you say that to a physical therapist, they'll say it's an imbalance issue and let's try to get it back together. So it's almost like they all have their hammers and looking for their specific nails. So I tried to do vision exercises with a neuro-ophthalmologist. I tried to do brain issues, and they all have theories. But unfortunately, there are only a few doctors really who have understanding of the entire system as opposed to the individual organ. And most of them say, yeah, we don't really know what's going on, but these medications can suppress the symptoms. I mean, as you know, it can be exciting prematurely to talk to a doctor who seems to have a solution, and then very disappointing when I at least realize that the solution they promised, wasn't the answer.
yeah. So, Brian, now that you're in the medication, you're at a level that is working for you. Will you plan eventually on maybe starting decreasing it again and again and again to see if you can get it down to zero?
So you ask a complicated question because intellectually the answer is yes. I know that I don't want my entire life to be on heavy doses of medication that are treating me for reasons that doctors don't fully understand.
Mhm.
But viscerally, the thought of going through what I went through years ago, which was medication was helping me. I slowly went off the medication, and then it took me another 5 years to find medication that worked again. I'm so terrified of that I honestly don't know. I'm gonna give it another year or two and just try to exist and be grateful that I'm able to hang out with my children and work again and spend some time with my friends. And then after that, talk to a psychopharmacologist I've been working with in New York about different ways of possibly, tapering off one of the medications and seeing whether I experience deleterious symptoms or not. But I'm scared.
Yeah, no, well, and we all are, because this condition is so surreal. It's very debilitating. And I know in your article you mentioned marijuana, for example, and many of the symptoms make you feel like you're high, because
Right.
you feel off balance, you feel the brain fog, and you feel in this state of derealization where you feel like it's a dream-like state every day. It's almost
Right.
like the days are passing you by without you fully living them.
And
So
it's funny you say that. I mean, that's exactly right for so many reasons. So the first time that I felt this kind of type of dizziness, I've never been a big drugs guy, but I was smoking a little bit of pot, and then I thought I was just high for the next day, and then for 3 or 4 days, and it continued, and that's when I started getting worried. And then I talk about it in terms of alcohol. You mentioned it in terms of marijuana, but that feeling of discombobulation and surreality is exactly right. And now looking back on those 4 or 5 years, I have no idea what I did during most of those days. Like I have very few distinct memories of years of my life. I remember some of the awful moments, when I was so
in your
like unable to
darkest
take
time.
care of my children, or really miserable or crying or upset. I remember some of the doctor's appointments and the excitement and the disappointment, but you're right, days go by and they're just sort of lost to a fog.
Yes. Uh, Now, Brian, what do you think triggers this? Because you think it's trauma, you think it's a stress? Because many of the people that get it, they were much like you and me, living normal, regular lives, happy lives, being active, and then from one day to the next, bam,
Right. So
this
I can
came
I
on.
can tell you, I have no idea. I can tell you what the specialists across the country told me for my forthcoming article, which is that certain people like us, we have brains that are vulnerable to this type of stimuli, where other people would be able to, for me, maybe it was smoking pot. For other people, it's concussion. For other people, maybe it's anxiety. For other people, it's an emotional something. But there's some sort of trigger, either major or minor, that undoes the equilibrium of our brain.
Mhm.
And I know that there's sort of we're talking in metaphors here, and I hate it because I wish that they understood the science better. And
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
really know, the word equilibrium doesn't really have a medical or scientific definition, but the way that it has been described to me that I find most understandable is that some people's brains are just more susceptible to being thrown off from their regular system. So people like you and I, we were maybe high achievers in some ways. We were focused. We were able to live life, in a successful way. And then for whatever reason, we're sensitive to minor changes in whatever, neurological stability we had. So for me, it was the smoking pot that time. It can be invisible to other people or major. Like some people have panic attacks, then they're dizzy the whole time. Some
Yeah.
people have BPPV, with the crystals in their
Yep.
ear once, and then they are dizzy, and that becomes a different, whether it's vestibular migraine or PPPD after that. Some people have a concussion which leads to it, and other people we just don't know. But the way that I have been led to understand the problem is that the system isn't alone. I mean, the problem isn't exclusive to the ear or the brain or the eyes. It is a systematic problem
Together. Yeah.
that's caused by some undoing or imbalancing or loss of equilibrium, either by a large event or a small event, that makes the system no longer able to function correctly. And that either exercises, or some of the people have had luck with acupuncture or chiropractor, or somebody like me just suppressing that vestibular system, is the best way to find life again. But that's the best way I can understand it. But it's still, doctors don't understand it fully, and those who say they do have a hard time communicating it to people who don't have the neurological language.
Yeah. Right. So you don't think this might be related to some sort of like virus that is maybe not identified yet, that maybe
Oh,
hit us?
absolutely, because I mean, you see people who complain, as I say, the easy ones to follow are the ones where they have a concussion and then they're just dizzy after that,
Yeah,
or
it's
they have a panic attack and they're just happened to that. But other times it absolutely starts with something like vestibular neuritis, which can be a virus in the inner ear, where we didn't even realize we had it, and then all of a sudden it becomes chronic. With me, I think there was something about smoking pot that first time that again, forgive the inarticulate vocabulary, but that like rejiggered something in my neurological synapses, which made my brain lose equilibrium. But I'm certain that vestibular neuritis or something along these lines, viruses that you don't understand sneaks up on you, and then that can absolutely be a trigger, just like these more prominent other triggers are.
Yeah. Brian, now, so you are obviously an advocate for your own story because you lived it, you know, you experience all these symptoms, you written your article before, you're working on a new one. What is your purpose with this? Are you trying to create more awareness, or are you just trying to maybe get more doctors to learn more about it?
Right.
What is the purpose?
I think the answer has to be from both directions. I think that you have, and just, I should mention also that my next novel, which is coming out in March, has a main character who's experiencing these symptoms as well. Okay. So I'm going to be talking a lot about this in a way I feel is important, because the number, like after headache and back pain, some degree of dizziness is the number 3 symptom that Americans go to see their primary care physicians with. Yep. And on the medical side, primary care practitioners, because the vast majority of dizziness is either BPPV with the inner ear crystals or vestibular neuritis, which is a virus, they get cured by themselves, and the doctors therefore don't know that there are other more severe symptoms. And I feel like education at the primary care level is important for doctors to understand the breadth of this. And then even on the secondary care level, inner ear doctors, they look for problems in the inner ear, perform some tests, by the way, that insurance companies will pay for because they won't pay for the more complicated tests that people just need. They see, okay, there's no problem in the inner ear, just like the neurologist sees there's no problem if I take a CT scan or an MRI. And I feel like education needs to go from the primary care and the secondary care practitioners as well to the patients who need to learn to start advocating for themselves. I've spoken to a few hundred patients who have comparable, they've either filled out surveys or emailed with me, and there's so many of them, mostly women, who were told by their doctor initially, you're just stressed out, it's because you had kids, or it's because you want to have kids, or because you didn't have kids, or because you're worried about a relationship, or you're not in a relationship. And it's just, they blame these symptoms on the anxiety, which is complicated because the symptoms do create anxiety, and there definitely is an anxious part of it. Of course, I'm anxious when I can't live my real life. But I think that if more and more of these patients know that not to take those first primary care practitioner doctors at their word and to advocate for themselves and to seek out, people who are more expert in the field, it has to come from all these directions. It has to come, more money and research needs to come from the federal government, who spends lots and lots of money on, cardiac issues, but none at all on vestibular issues. It has to come from insurance companies who will pay for more of the tests that people like us need. It has to come from the patients who will advocate themselves more. It has to come from the medical education system, where residencies are more sought after and more financed in vestibular neurology as opposed to surgery, which everybody in America wants to go become a surgeon because it pays better. So I don't think it's one or the other. I hope to be able to have these conversations with people such as yourself, and then with the New York Times, with other people interviewing me with my novel coming out in March, as a way to draw awareness at all aspects of the experience, from the patient to the doctor and the financial incentives behind all of it.
Yeah, and it's great that you're doing this because, like you mentioned, many people probably get misdiagnosed because they are experiencing these symptoms, and the doctors just say, hey, it's anxiety, go back home. Meanwhile, they are not treating the actual, whether it is PPPD or vestibular migraine, and people go home without answers, more questions than answers. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And in order to be somebody who, one, has the wherewithal to disagree with what a doctor says, two, has the ability to find experts in their area, three, has the financial access to fly to specialists or to take time off work, or has insurance that's able to cover them, or to stay in a hotel near the Mayo Clinic like I do. Like, you need to not only be financially comfortable. You need to have the confidence to ignore experts. It's just how many people fit into that category. I'm very lucky in that I was able to bully my way through it. But if you take the average American who is a middle class or lower working class woman experiencing this, who doesn't have the life experience of research or the access or the telling a doctor, the doctor doesn't know what he or she is talking about. It's just such a small group of people, and people then start self-medicating with alcohol, or they go, to become opioid addicts, or they lose their jobs or lose their family, and it's not their fault, and it's infuriating, and it's terrifying. And knowing that I am one of the lucky ones in that I suffered for so long, but I was able to at least reach a place where I can live again, knowing that there are definitely thousands and possibly hundreds of thousands of Canadians out there dealing with comparable symptoms is horrifying to me. Yeah. And I think that there is a moral obligation to try to get the word out, as you are doing, and as I try to do, that there's, to the patients, to the system, to the doctors, to anybody who could potentially help.
Yeah, right. Brian, we're coming to here almost to the ending of our interview. My last couple of questions are: what does the future hold for you now?
So I have never been happier. I feel like I was taking a lot of life for granted and losing everything, in that way where I couldn't do anything at all. It makes me, excited to spend time with my family, and excited to spend time with my students, and excited to get, my writing out in the world. That being said, it's a limited number of hours a day that I can be active, and I hope to extend that. I also know that sometimes these medications become less effective over time, and we don't really have the data on that, where it's all anecdotal now, and some doctors are big believers that if it works now, there's no reason it should dissipate. Other people strongly believe it will dissipate over time. I don't know, so I'm scared. I live a combination of feeling very grateful, and at the same time frustrated that I can't do more, and scared about what the future brings. So I have no idea is the answer. But I
just live day by day, I guess.
But yeah, to the extent that people are able to live, that's never been my strength, being able to live day by day. I'm doing my best to try to take pleasure in the moments I can take pleasure in, and confront whatever happens next when it happens. But for the moment, I feel primarily lucky.
Great. The last thing that I wanted to say is, would you like to invite everybody to follow you in social media? Maybe check out your previous article and the new one coming up, your novel as well?
Absolutely, that would be great. On Twitter, Brian Platzer, or just at B Platzer, BPLATZER. On Facebook, it's just my name, Brian Platzer. If you search for me, I'm the one that comes up on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And I would love to have this be a larger conversation among people who are either curious about these issues or want to ask me about my experience. Any way I can help for anybody in any way at all, please come and ask me, because I've spent so many years focused on this and all the variety of ways to try to have these conversations in useful ways, that please do get in touch.
Great, right. Thanks, Brian. So I really appreciate this. Thank you very much for all your knowledge and for sharing this time with me. And hopefully we can keep in touch and find out more about these conditions.
Definitely. And thank you for spending so much time trying to spread awareness as well. I really appreciate the conversation.
My pleasure. All right, Brian. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.